Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. There are moments in the grimdark saga of Warhammer 40k where the narrative doesn't just shift, it ruptures. The death of Horus, Warmaster of Chaos, was such a moment. It wasn't simply the fall of a Primarch, nor the end of a rebellion. It was the shattering of a myth in real time. Horus was more than the architect of the Imperium's near collapse. He was its golden son, the one trusted above all, who then became its greatest monster. His final battle aboard the Vengeful Spirit wasn't a clash of titans, it was a father killing his son, not out of hatred, but out of necessity. And when the Emperor's final soul-shattering blow vaporized Horus's essence, what remained behind was not a body of glory or a vessel of apotheosis. It was ruin, charred flesh, a husk, a thing. But the story didn't end with the severing of that final breath. Horus's corpse became a silent battleground. What should have been discarded as refuse by the gods or obliterated by loyalists instead became a relic of unimaginable weight, a symbol of betrayal, a beacon of failure, a prize. And across the millennia that followed, that body, and what might still remain of it, became the focus of obsession, madness, grief, and ambition. This is the story of what happened after Horus fell, and why even in death his shadow never stopped looming. When the Emperor struck down Horus, it was not simply a death blow, it was an unmaking. The act itself was beyond violence. It was annihilation of the soul. The psychic crescendo that tore Horus from reality was the apex of raw divine fury. The Warmaster, once uplifted by the ruinous powers and blessed with their might, was stripped of everything in a heartbeat. His soul was utterly obliterated, not consigned to the warp like so many of the damned, but erased. No whispers remained, no echoes in the immaterium, just a silence where once raged a godlike presence. The Emperor ensured that Horus would not rise again. What was left behind was not befitting a Primarch. The body of Horus, if it could even still be called that, was twisted and blackened, a collapsed ruin of once golden flesh. Accounts speak of a form warped by warp energy and then ravaged by psychic fire. It was burned beyond recognition, seared to the marrow, his features lost in a char of ash and molten ceramite. His famed armor, the serpent's scales, was cracked and shredded, warped into hideous angles. The Warmaster's face, which had once inspired legions, was little more than a cratered cavity of scorched bone and melted flesh. Those who found his body in the aftermath were likely not awed but horrified. This was not a corpse that lay in state. This was a monument to ruination, the aftermath of the universe's most tragic betrayal. Loyalist forces had no time to scavenge or destroy it. The traitor fleets fled with his remains shortly after the Emperor's internment in the Golden Throne. But for a brief moment, as the flames of the Vengeful Spirit's inner sanctum dimmed and silence fell upon the bridge, the body of Horus lay alone, abandoned, not mourned, not revered. The Chaos Gods, whose whispers had once driven him to murder his father and break the Imperium, did not speak to him now. They did not claim the husk. They turned away. That alone is telling. Unlike the other traitor Primarchs who would eventually ascend to demonhood, becoming grotesque avatars of their patrons, Horus had no such destiny. He had been offered apotheosis, and he had rejected it. In his pride, in his vision of being the one true master of mankind, he denied the gods their due. And so when he fell, they let him fall fully. No claw of corn reached for him. No whisper of Tzinch shielded his dying thoughts. No decadent illusion of Slanesh softened his pain. No rot of Nurgle preserved him. They let him die as a mortal, and worse, they allowed his soul to be destroyed. His body, ruined beyond sanctity, was left as a smear upon the deck of a dying flagship. It was a cruel irony. The being who had nearly sundered the galaxy, whose voice once commanded entire star systems to burn, was reduced to silence. His body, which had moved with the power and grace of a demigod, was now just smoldering flesh clinging to cracked bone. And for a moment, in that stillness, the galaxy held its breath. There are whispers among the few mortal witnesses who survived the battle that something lingered, a scent, a chill, a pressure in the air around the corpse. Not a soul, not a warp presence, but a rawness, a vacuum. As if even the warp avoided what remained of Horus. As if the space where his spirit should have been was now a wound in reality. The Emperor had not only killed a body, he had struck a void into existence, one that would never truly close. In some ways, That corpse was more dangerous in death than Horus ever was in life, because in it was crystallized everything: ambition, betrayal, glory, and downfall. It was a warning written in burned flesh. And even as the vengeful spirit fled into the warp, cradling the remains of the slain Warmaster, that warning echoed. This is what happens when gods are denied, when pride overreaches, when sons turn on fathers. In the choking aftermath of the siege of Terra, as the ruined traitor legions scattered into the void like broken shards of a shattered sword, one figure walked back into the ashes of defeat with fire still in his heart: Abaddon. He was first captain of the Luna Wolves, Horus's most trusted son, the tip of his spear, the voice of his wrath. And when he returned to the vengeful spirit and saw the charred ruin of what had once been the greatest being in the galaxy, something inside him broke. The corpse of Horus was no longer the Warmaster. It was a monument to loss. Yet Abaddon did not flinch. He did not weep. He carried the body. No other act in his long and blood-stained life speaks louder than that one moment, when he gathered the smoldering remnants of his gene-father into his arms and refused to let go. This wasn't simple loyalty. It was a kind of madness, an inability to accept that the dream, the war, the purpose had died. He carried Horus away not just to preserve him, but because to leave him behind was to admit that all of it had been for nothing, that the long war had already been lost. And so the morning sun took his broken father into the depths of the eye. The Chaos Gods watched, impassive. The other traitor Primarchs had vanished into the warp or scattered to their own corners of reality, licking their wounds and nursing their shame. But Abaddon stayed. He sat beside Horus's corpse, spoke to it, communed with it, not with a ghost or a daemon or a lingering soul, for there was none, but with memory. He begged for meaning. He demanded answers. Some say he kept Horus's remains enshrined for years, wrapped in mourning cloths and hidden in stasis fields, guarded by demonic wards and techno-arcane seals. Others claim he bathed the corpse in sacred warp oils and kept it on a throne in the deepest vaults of the vengeful spirit, surrounded by effigies of the Mournival who had once served him. But perhaps most compelling is the sense that Abaddon was not merely grieving, he was denying the futility of Horus's failure, denying the judgment of the gods, denying the void left in the galaxy by a godless death. Abaddon did not speak the truth for decades. He did not name himself Warmaster. He did not raise new banners, because Horus was not gone, not in his mind. As long as the corpse remained, so too did the war. So too did the dream. There is something tragically human in that. For all the monstrous things Abaddon would become, the despoiler, the Lord of the Black Legion, the bane of the Imperium, in those early years, he was just a son who could not let go. Even when others told him it was over, that the gods had moved on, that the Eye offered them new glories, he kept his vigil. And in the stillness of those hollow years, Abaddon began to change. The grief hardened. The silence twisted into resolve. Some whispered that the corpse spoke to him. Not in words, not in the voice of Horus, but through the warp. Not as soul, but symbol. That in his nights of meditation, the body became a mirror, reflecting everything Abaddon hated and feared: failure, betrayal, weakness. And in that reflection, he found purpose. He would not make the same mistake. He would not bow to gods only to be abandoned. He would not be their pawn. And most of all, he would not repeat Horus's sin, the sin of falling short. When at last he rose from mourning, it was as something new. He cast off the name Luna Wolves. He took the burden of failure and reforged it as fury. The Black Legion was born not from a war cry, but from a whispered vow beside a corpse. He did not preserve Horus to venerate him. He preserved him to remember what not to become. The Mournival had once been Horus's voice, his conscience, and his blade. 4 warriors who embodied not only the martial prowess of the Luna Wolves, but also the internal balance of their Primarch's will. Garviel Loken, Tarik Torgadon, Abaddon, and Horus Aximand. Names once spoken with reverence across the stars. They had stood at Horus's side when he was still noble, still beloved, still the embodiment of the Emperor's vision. They had laughed with him, fought beside him, bled for him, and then they watched as he descended into darkness. Some followed willingly, some fell by the wayside, some broke, but none of them escaped unchanged. The death of Horus, the true, final, irreversible death, did not just shatter the legions, it shattered whatever remained of the Mournival's bond. Those few who survived, scattered across the eye or cast adrift in their own torment, carried the wound like a brand. For them, Horus had not simply died, he had failed. And worse, he had made them complicit in that failure. Horus Aximand, often called Little Horus for his eerie resemblance to his gene father, had tried to hold on longer than most. Even as madness spread through the Legion, even as the corruption of chaos twisted the Warmaster into something inhuman, Aximand remained loyal. Not to chaos, but to Horus himself. That distinction mattered to him. He believed in the man, not the monster. When Horus fell, some say Aximand wept not just for the death, but for the years lost to delusion. His own wounds were deep. There are apocryphal tales that in the years after Terra, he wandered alone among daemon worlds, cradling broken helms and speaking to ghosts. Eventually, he vanished, perhaps consumed by madness, perhaps finally destroyed by the guilt he could no longer suppress. Tarek Torgadon, the bright soul among them, had died long before Horus's final fall, a casualty of betrayal during the early days of the heresy. Yet in many ways, his absence became a kind of spiritual void in the Mournival. Some surviving Lunawolves claimed that if Torgadon had lived, he might have stopped Horus from falling so far. That his humor, his warmth, his defiance, might have rekindled something in the Warmaster's heart. Instead, his death marked a turning point, the moment the Mournival ceased to be a family and became an instrument of war. Garviel Loken, the last true loyalist, survived not only physically but spiritually. He had denounced Horus, refused to turn, and was cast out, presumed dead. When he resurfaced in the shadows of the Imperium, he carried the weight of a man who had seen everything he loved corrupted. He spoke little of the Mournival, even less of Horus. But in every battle he fought afterward, in every strike he made against the traitors, it was clear he was mourning. Not just the man Horus had become, but the ideal he once was. Loken's grief was action, a slow, methodical dismantling of the Legion he once called brotherhood. And then there was Abaddon, the only one who remained close to Horus until the bitter end. He was the mourner who could not cry, the son who refused to let go. While the others crumbled, died, or raged in their isolation, Abaddon turned his grief into something monstrous. He silenced the legacy of the Mournival, buried it beneath a tide of war and black banners. He did not speak of them. He did not honor them, perhaps because he could not forgive them, or himself. Or perhaps because he needed to kill that part of his past to become what he was destined to be. The mourning of the Mournival was not a unified thing. It was fragmented, quiet, often hidden beneath layers of fury and regret. But it persisted. In each of them, a part of Horus still lived, not the corrupted Warmaster, but the golden general they had followed to the stars. That memory was both a blessing and a curse. It haunted their choices, echoed in their silences, and bled into their every act of vengeance or defiance. In a galaxy that had moved on, that now whispered the name of Abaddon with fear and reverence, the ghosts of the Mournival remained trapped in a moment that could never be undone. The moment when Horus, their friend and father, fell not just in battle, but from grace. And the echoes of that fall still linger, even now. To understand the fate of Horus's body, one must understand the silence of the gods. When Horus fell, it was not just his mortal frame that was destroyed, it was his divine potential. He had been offered immortality, elevation, and transformation. The gods of chaos had poured their blessings into him, shaping him into their chosen champion, their instrument of galactic upheaval. He had the power to ascend, to become a demon prince of unimaginable stature. And yet, at the very edge of apotheosis, he refused. Not in words, but in spirit. Horus had come to believe he was the master, not the servant, that the gods were his tools, not his patrons. It was his pride that damned him, and the gods do not forgive pride. In the final moments of the siege of Terra, as Horus faced his father, the Chaos Gods watched. They could have saved him. They could have intervened. They had lifted lesser beings from death and turned them into gods of flesh and madness. But when Horus fell to the Emperor's blade, they did nothing. Not out of weakness, out of judgment. Horus had failed them, and worse, he had forgotten his place. The ruinous powers do not abide disobedience, so they let him die. There is something deeply cruel in that. Horus was their greatest investment, the spark that ignited the heresy, the architect of the long war. They had whispered in his dreams, wrapped his soul in promise, carved their gifts into his flesh. But when the final blow came, they abandoned him utterly. His soul was not drawn screaming into the warp to be reshaped or enslaved. It was simply destroyed. The Emperor's power erased it so completely that not even the gods could reclaim it. And in that moment, a truth was revealed. The Chaos Gods do not love. They do not cherish. They do not reward loyalty for its own sake. They use, they exploit, and when their tool breaks, they discard it. The fate of Horus's body is tied intrinsically to this divine rejection. His corpse did not rise. It did not mutate or burn with unholy light. It did not howl with the essence of a demon prince denied martyrdom. It simply rotted, because the gods would not touch it, not even to desecrate it. They wanted nothing to do with the reminder of their greatest failure. In the eyes of Khorne, he had not spilled enough blood. In the eyes of Tzeentch, his plan had collapsed. In the eyes of Nurgle, he had not endured. In the eyes of Slaanesh, he had brought no ecstasy. He had brought only defeat. That silence, that divine absence, is perhaps more terrifying than damnation. The other traitor Primarchs in their own time were granted ascension. Mortarion, Fulgrim, Angron, and Magnus became terrible gods unto themselves. But Horus had aimed higher. He wanted it all. He did not want to be a daemon prince. He wanted to be emperor. And the moment he embraced that heresy, that vision of supremacy beyond the gods, he signed his death warrant. In death, Horus became a lesson, a monument not to chaos power, but to its vengeance. His remains were left untouched by divine favor. His name, though spoken in reverence by some, was etched with failure in the minds of demons and prophets. His corpse, in the hands of Abaddon and the early Black Legion, was a symbol not of victory, but of divine wrath and mortal arrogance. The gods let the galaxy see what happens to those who overreach. And yet, there is a perverse beauty in that doom. Horus was, in the end, the most human of all the Primarchs. He rose by merit, fell by pride, and died not with a whisper of warp song, but with the silence of the betrayed. That silence echoes still, louder than any demon's roar. The Chaos Gods may have turned their backs on him, but in doing so, they created something even more potent than a prince of the warp. They created a cautionary tale etched in ash and bone. They say the dead should be left to rest, but Horus never was allowed that peace. From the moment Abaddon lifted the broken corpse from the deck of the vengeful spirit, it was never just a body. It was a relic, a symbol, an accusation. It was both sacred and profane. And for decades, perhaps centuries, the War Master's remains became the most coveted and reviled object in the Eye of Terror, preserved not out of honor, but out of obsession. The methods of preservation are shrouded in myth, corrupted memory, and warp-tainted whispers. Some say Abaddon had the corpse encased in an arcane stasis field powered by daemon hearts and corrupted cogitators, maintaining the exact moment of death. Every crack in the bone, every burnt sinew, every scorched remnant of his ruined armor preserved in time like a grotesque shrine. Others believe Horus's body was mummified through dark rituals, sealed with sorcerous embalming rites drawn from pre-imperial necromancy, reinforced with ceramite sarcophagi inlaid with the sigils of the Dark Mechanicum. And there are worse rumors. Tales of rituals performed by cults within the nascent Black Legion, who worshipped not chaos, but Horus himself. These heretics refused to accept his failure, seeing his body as a holy relic. They crafted icons from the splinters of his armor, relic blades said to contain fragments of his ribcage, and banners soaked in the preserved fluids that leaked from the corpse. Entire warbands dedicated themselves to protecting his tomb, waging wars not for glory or plunder, but for the sanctity of a ruined corpse. This was not reverence, it was desecration. Because even in preservation, the corpse of Horus decayed. It was not embalmed by divine power. It was not sanctified by the warp. The stasis fields could slow time, but they could not stop entropy. His form became bloated with warp rot, skin turned translucent and stretched across shattered muscle. Eyes long vaporized began to leak black ichor and spectral tears. The golden tones of his skin, what little had survived the Emperor's fury, turned to the waxy gray of the damned. And through it all, the body pulsed faintly, as though rejecting death itself, a flicker of primal, corrupted biology snarling against the void. That is when the profanities began. The early Black Legion, fractured and uncertain, debated what to do with the corpse. Some wanted to destroy it, to burn it, scatter the ashes, purge the shame. Others sought to use it, to harness its latent power. There were whispers that the genes of Horus still pulsed with unnatural vitality, that in his marrow lay secrets greater than any daemon's whisper. The Dark Mechanicum salivated at the potential, not to resurrect him, but to replicate him, to craft new legions in his image, a new pantheon of clone sons. Fabius Bile, the twisted genius of the Emperor's children, was given access. What he did next would echo across millennia, a grotesque culmination of science and sacrilege. But even before Bile's scalpel carved its first incision, the damage had been done. Horus had not been left in death. He had been harvested, defiled, turned from hero to husk to raw material. Yet perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this era is the belief that Horus's spirit, truly destroyed by the Emperor, left behind a void that refused to be filled. Those who spent too long near his body reported dreams of screaming suns and weeping stars. Others claimed to hear a heartbeat from within the tomb, slow and labored, like the galaxy trying to forget him but failing. The preservation was not stasis, it was imprisonment. The corpse of Horus did not rest. It lingered. In the end, the decision to keep Horus's body was not one of honor or remembrance. It was one of control. The Black Legion needed a rallying point, a reminder of their origins, and yet the more they stared at that broken figure, the more the cracks widened in their belief. Because in the rot and ruin of the once great Warmaster, they saw not inspiration, but warning. Fabius Bile never saw Horus as a god or a hero. To him, the Warmaster was a masterpiece. A canvas of genetic perfection marred by poor choices. The moment Bile laid eyes on the remains of Horus, he didn't see a corpse, he saw an opportunity, a chance to reshape the galaxy in his own vision. A chance to prove that the science of the Emperor could be surpassed, twisted, improved. In Horus's ruin, Bile found the beginning of something new, and something monstrous. The first violation was surgical. Bile and his acolytes from the Emperor's children approached the corpse with ritualistic precision. But it was not reverence, it was hunger. They cut deep into the ruined body, ignoring the psychic scars and warp burns. The remnants of Horus's gene seed were extracted, what little remained unsinged by the Emperor's fire. His bone marrow, tissue samples, fragments of synaptic pathways, and traces of his unique genetic matrix were catalogued and preserved, not as relics, but as resources. What followed was the beginning of Bile's darkest legacy. He attempted to clone Horus, not once, but many times. The early clones were abominations, twitching, malformed horrors with bloated limbs, screaming mouths, and fractured minds. They died in agony, unable to contain the magnitude of what they were meant to become. But Bile learned. Slowly, through sacrifice and experimentation, he refined the process. He grew new Warmasters in vats of amniotic fluid, accelerating their growth with stolen Mechanicum technology and warp alchemy. He stitched them with knowledge, downloaded memories, and recreated the psychic architecture of a Primarch, or so he believed. But it wasn't enough. The clones lacked something, a fire, a soul, the divine ambition that had once made Horus the chosen of the gods. They were copies, yes, but pale, dull, and docile. They could lift mountains but could not command legions. They could speak the words, but not inspire belief. The Black Legion, when they learned of these experiments, recoiled. To them, this was not resurrection. This was desecration on a level even chaos found abhorrent. And yet Bile persisted. It is said that he once crafted a clone so perfect, so physically identical to the original Horus, that even seasoned veterans of the Lunawolves wept upon seeing it. This Horus walked, spoke, and commanded like the Warmaster of old. Bile thought he had succeeded. For a brief, blasphemous moment, the Long War had its champion reborn. But the truth was cruel. The clone did not remember Terra. It did not remember the heresy. It lacked the anguish, the betrayal, the dreams that had turned the original Horus into the being he was. It was a vessel without pain. And in that void, there was weakness. When Abaddon confronted the clone, he saw it for what it was, a hollow echo. Not a rebirth, but a mockery. In a moment that echoed the Emperor's mercy slaughter, Abaddon slew the clone without hesitation, declaring that there would never again be a Warmaster Horus. This act was more than execution. It was exorcism. Bile, undeterred, continued his experiments. He did not stop with Horus. His obsession broadened. He sought to clone all of the Primarchs, to create a pantheon of warlords forged in his image of perfection. He built dark laboratories hidden across the Eye of Terror, filled with failed proto-Primarchs, gene-spliced monstrosities, and half-living gods that screamed for meaning. But none were ever truly Horus. Because Horus was not just flesh, it was will. And that will had been annihilated on the deck of the vengeful spirit. No scalpel could retrieve it. No vat could recreate it. Bile, for all his genius and depravity, could not stitch a soul from muscle and memory. His failure with Horus marked the beginning of a spiral. A descent not just into darker science but into philosophical madness. He became less a surgeon and more a prophet of flesh, convinced that through endless iteration, he could birth gods. But deep down, even Bile must have known. The War Master was beyond him. Ulanor was supposed to be a symbol, the place where Horus first rose, where he was crowned as War Master, where the dream of a united Imperium had burned brightest before it soured into rebellion. And it was on Ulanor, in the long shadow of that memory, that Fabius Bile dared to mock the galaxy's greatest tragedy by resurrecting its fallen son. The Clone War of Ulanor was not a campaign. It was a ritual masquerading as war. A theater of flesh and fire performed on the stage of old glory. Bile had brought his perfected clone of Horus to the world that had once crowned the original. The symbolism was grotesque and intentional, a parody of the Emperor's own ceremony. The clone was armored in imitation regalia, flanked by mock Luna wolves, their heraldry twisted into Baroque mockeries of the past. Bile's warbands declared him the true heir of chaos, the new War Master, reborn not through divine blessing but through science, mastery, and will. It was not enough for Bile to clone Horus. He wanted the galaxy to believe he had returned, and for a time, some did. The cloned Horus, though lacking the spiritual fire of his predecessor, was powerful, charismatic, and driven by the false memories Bile had embedded within him. He led the assault on Ulanor with terrifying efficiency, slaughtering Imperial defenders and reasserting his claim to the legacy of the War Master. Loyalists who encountered him were stunned. Many believed, in horror, that Horus had returned, that history had begun to repeat its darkest chapter. But the Black Legion knew better. Abaddon, upon hearing of this abomination, gathered his warlords and launched a crusade into the heart of the conflict. To him, it was more than treachery. It was blasphemy. Bile had defiled the very purpose that had forged the Black Legion, the lesson of failure, the rejection of divine puppetry, the denial of false idols. The clone was everything Abaddon had sought to bury. The weakness of nostalgia, the easy lie of resurrection. When the two forces met on Ulanor, it was not merely war. It was exorcism. The clone of Horus met Abaddon in battle, surrounded by the echoes of ancient triumph. It was said to be a brutal duel, echoing the rhythms of the original heresy, but reversed. This time, it was the son who slew the father, not in mercy, but in contempt. The clone fought well, wielding his weapon with eerie familiarity, but Abaddon fought with conviction born of decades of grief, rage, and betrayal. He struck the clone down not once, but again and again, until the pretender's body was broken beyond all recognition. And then he burned it, until not even ash remained. In doing so, Abaddon made a statement that would define the Black Legion for all time. There would never be another Horus. There would be no second coming, no resurrection, no salvation through cloning or false prophecy. The past was dead, and he, Abaddon, would carry its burden without seeking to recreate it. The aftermath of Ulanor's desecration sent ripples across the Eye of Terror. Many warbands who had briefly aligned with Bile's vision turned away in disgust or fear. Bile himself escaped, of course, as he always does, retreating to his laboratories to scheme anew. But the experiment had failed, not just biologically, but ideologically. The galaxy had seen the truth. A clone of Horus could never reclaim the War Master's mantle, because Horus had not been made by science or sorcery. He had been forged in loyalty, ambition, betrayal, and annihilation. The clone lacked that crucible, and in the crucible, legends are either broken or made. The Clone War of Ulanor was not a victory for Abaddon. It was a burial, of hope, of memory, of the lie that Horus could be reclaimed. In fire and ruin, the galaxy was reminded that some dead should stay dead, and in the smoldering crater where a false god had once stood, the long war took on a new shape. Not one of resurrection, but of unrelenting, forward-moving wrath. There are whispers in the eye of terror, murmured behind daemon-veiled tongues and echoed through cursed vox channels, that Horus is not entirely gone. Not truly. Not completely. His soul may have been annihilated, his body burned or entombed or cloned and destroyed, but something lingers, some echo, some residue. A psychic afterimage too stubborn to fade. And in the deepest vaults of the Black Legion, where light dies and memory curdles into myth, there is said to be a reliquary. A tomb. A prison. Or perhaps a shrine. The Black Reliquary, if it exists, is known only to the highest warlords, and even they speak of it in metaphor. It is not a place one visits, it is a place one inherits, one bleeds for, one fears. The few who claim to have seen it describe a vault so deep in the bowels of the vengeful spirit that even the ship's demonic engine recoils from its presence. Inside lies what remains of Horus. Not a living body, not a clone, not a soul-trapped husk, but something. A preserved remnant, a sliver of tissue, a bone fragment, a flickering psychic scar carved into reality. What it is does not matter as much as what it represents, the last physical tether to the War Master. Abaddon has never spoken of it. Some believe he keeps it not as a relic of love, but as a weapon, a reminder to himself of what he must never become. Others suggest darker purposes. That in times of uncertainty, he descends into the Black Reliquary to commune not with Horus, but with the idea of Horus. To scream at his failure, to remind the gods of their own betrayal, to prove that the despoiler walks a path not of mimicry, but of conquest. But even Abaddon cannot control how others perceive such a relic. There are warbands who whisper that Horus still dreams within the reliquary, that he is not dead, but dormant, waiting for a time when the stars align and the warp weeps open to permit his return. Cults have formed around this belief, seeing Abaddon not as War Master in his own right, but as custodian of a sleeping god. These factions do not seek victory in war, they seek resurrection. They believe the long war is not merely vengeance, but preparation for a second coming. And in that faith lies danger, because belief in a dead god is not easily extinguished. Every time a relic is unearthed bearing the mark of the Luna Wolves, every time a sorcerer claims to hear the voice of the War Master in the warp, that belief is rekindled. Some even claim the Black Reliquary has been moved, that it no longer lies within the vengeful spirit, but has been hidden on a daemon world so warped by memory and pain that reality itself bends to the shape of Horus's dreams. A world where time is frozen at the moment of his death, looping endlessly in psychic agony. There are even darker rumors that Abaddon has not destroyed the last piece of Horus because he can't, that whatever fragment remains cannot be unmade, not by fire, not by sorcery, not even by the will of the gods. That it clings to existence through sheer force of what Horus was, and that its continued presence in the galaxy is a kind of blight, a psychic tumor infecting every vision of the future. That every prophecy of the end times, the true end, not the long war, but the final cataclysm, includes the possibility of Horus walking again, not in flesh but in idea. A myth reborn, not from cloning vats or forgotten gene seed, but from belief itself. If this is true, the Black Reliquary is not just a prison or a shrine. It is a fuse, one that may ignite the galaxy anew or unravel it entirely. In a galaxy where divinity is both weapon and curse, Horus did the unthinkable. He refused to become a god. The moment he accepted the title of War Master, the Chaos Gods opened their arms to him. They offered him everything: immortality, demonic power, a throne upon the carcass of Terra. Other Primarchs would take that offer eagerly. Fulgrim, Angron, Mortarion, Magnus, they all shed their mortal constraints to ascend into something other, something eternal. But Horus? Horus said no. It was not a spoken refusal. It was in his choices, in his posture, in the way he bore his corruption like a tool rather than a destiny. He used the power of the gods, but never let it own him. He wielded warp energy as a general wields artillery, with calculated purpose, not religious devotion. Even at the apex of his transformation, as the siege of Terra began, and he strode through the ranks of daemons and traitor legions, Horus wore no crown of apotheosis. His flesh had been warped, yes, and his eyes burned with warp fire, but he remained in essence Horus. Not a daemon prince, not a vessel, but a man. That refusal, more than any act of war or betrayal, sealed his doom. Because the gods demand submission, they reward faith. They do not elevate the proud, only the devout. And Horus, in the deepest fiber of his being, believed he was greater than them. He was not their servant, but their equal. A fool's belief, perhaps, but one that defined him. In his heart, Horus did not want to rule with the gods. He wanted to replace them. He saw the emperor as a false deity, not because he hated gods, but because he believed he could be a better one. And so when the final confrontation came, the gods let him fall. Not because he had failed militarily, he had brought the Imperium to the edge of collapse, but because he had failed spiritually. He had not embraced the truth of chaos. He had tried to take the power without the price. The emperor destroyed him utterly, but the gods did not lift a finger to stop it. They allowed the moment to happen. They orchestrated it even. Horus's refusal was not just defiance. It was blasphemy against chaos itself. The tragedy of that refusal ripples through every moment that followed. His body, denied the divine, decayed like any mortal's. His soul, unanchored by demonhood, could not survive the emperor's fury. He died the most human death a Primarch could die, annihilated in body and soul, unmourned by the gods he once served. And yet, that very refusal is what makes Horus unforgettable. Because he did not die as a pawn, he died as a challenger, as someone who looked at the gods of the warp and dared to think, I can do better. It was madness, it was arrogance, it was fatal, but it was also purity. In his final hour, Horus stood alone, not loyalist, not traitor, not god, just a son trying to kill his father, a soldier trying to win a war, a man trying to carve his name into the bones of the galaxy. That refusal has haunted the Black Legion ever since. Abaddon, though blessed by the gods, has never fully surrendered to them. He too carries that spark of defiance, that belief that chaos should be used, not worshipped. It is Horus's final legacy, etched not in monuments, but in ideology. In the belief that even in a galaxy of gods and monsters, one can still choose to remain only a man. Perhaps that's why the corpse of Horus has never truly been sanctified, never ascended, never burned with the unholy radiance of the warp. It is not just that the gods turned their backs on him. It is that he turned his back on them. His body is not divine, it is not demonic. It is refusal made flesh. And in that, it is more terrifying than any demon prince. Because it shows that even the greatest among mortals can look into the abyss and say, no. In the grimdark future of the 41st millennium, there are no shortages of gods, monsters, and icons. Yet among all the figures that loom large over the galaxy's ruinous landscape, none are as paradoxically revered and reviled as Horus. Though dead, he remains a specter, not because of what he became, but because of what others made of him. Over time, Horus stopped being a man. He became a mirror. And in that mirror, countless warlords, cults, and traitors have seen not the truth, but their own ambitions staring back. The tragedy is that Horus never wanted to be a god, but in death, he became an idol. To some warbands, he is a symbol of righteous rebellion. They speak of him as a liberator, the one who saw through the emperor's lies and struck the first blow for freedom. They ignore the madness that consumed him, the cost of his war, the billions who died in his name. They see only the strength of his defiance and adopt his legacy as a banner under which to commit their own atrocities. These are not followers of chaos in the old sense. They are followers of myth. They wear the eye of Horus, chant his name before battle, and claim to be the true inheritors of his will. To others, he is a warning, a monster, the greatest failure in the history of the galaxy. These are the bitter survivors, warriors who watched the Great Crusade burn, who lost comrades and honor in the fires of the heresy. To them, Horus is not a hero, but a tyrant who betrayed his brothers and damned his legion. They speak of him in hushed tones, spitting his name like a curse. Some even believe the Black Legion itself should have erased all traces of Horus, burying not just his corpse but his memory, because in remembering him they risk repeating his mistakes. The most dangerous interpretation, however, lies in those who see Horus as a path. They do not care if he was a hero or a villain. They see only the possibility he represented, that a Primarch, a being of divine potential, could nearly unmake the Imperium. These cults, often sorcerous in nature, seek not to worship Horus, but to emulate him. They look at the chaos he wrought and see inspiration. They breed new champions, infuse them with demonic essence, and proclaim them the next Warmaster. Each one a pale shadow, each one a new lie. It is a cycle of mimicry and madness, and it infects not just the traitors, but the Imperium as well. The High Lords of Terra still speak of Horus with dread. In the endless sermons of the Ecclesiarchy, his name is invoked not merely as a traitor, but as the ultimate traitor, the prototype for all heresy. Statues of him in ancient halls were defaced, ground into dust, his name struck from records, his deeds rewritten as pure evil. And yet, the more the Imperium tries to erase him, the more he endures. Because you cannot kill an idea with silence, you cannot unmake a myth with denial. In the most ironic twist of all, Horus has become the very thing he hated. A tool, used by fanatics to inspire slaughter, used by historians to explain collapse, used by warlords to justify tyranny. His image, broken and distorted, is projected again and again across the Imperium and the Eye alike, a perpetual justification for war. The idol of Horus is no longer the man or the corpse or even the legacy. It is a mask worn by monsters who want to believe their madness has meaning. And yet the true monster was always more subtle. Because Horus was not evil for evil's sake. He was not mad when he began. He fell, step by step, choice by choice, believing he was right. That is what makes him terrifying. Not that he betrayed the Emperor, but that he believed he had to. That he looked at the Imperium and saw rot, that he saw truth and tried to change it, and in doing so, became something worse than the lies he opposed. That nuance is lost now. In a galaxy that craves absolutes, saint or heretic, god or demon, hero or villain, Horus stands as something in between. A false idol, built on real wounds. A true monster, born from real ideals. And in the ashes of his memory, war continues. Because the truth is too painful. The myth is easier. There are psychers who wake screaming with no memory of what they've seen. Astropaths who weep blood when crossing certain sectors of space. Sorcerers who claim to hear a voice in the warp. Not the seductive whispers of daemons or the cries of lost souls, but something deeper, older, something broken. They call it the Echo. And some believe it is the last shadow of Horus, lingering not as a soul but as a wound in reality. When the Emperor struck Horus down, he did so with such absolute psychic force that it didn't merely destroy his son, it tore a hole in the fabric of the warp itself. The Warmaster's soul, unlike any other, was not banished to the Immaterium or twisted into demonic form. It was annihilated, erased. But even erasure has consequence. You cannot remove something so powerful from the universe without leaving a scar. And in the galaxy's spiritual substrate, that scar festers still. The Echo is not sentient. It is not Horus reborn. It is not a ghost. It is worse. It is the psychic equivalent of a scream that never ends. The last imprint of his dying thoughts stretched thin across the currents of the warp like flayed skin. Some who touch it are driven mad. Others become obsessed, haunted by visions of the siege, of the Emperor's golden light and Horus's final hateful roar. They wake with the image of burning cathedrals and screaming suns, of ruined armor and shattered dreams. And they always describe the same thing, a presence, immense and empty, like a god that once existed but is now wrong. The Echo appears most often near ancient battlefields of the heresy, on Cadia, before its fall, on the plains of Istvan Vith, around the ruins of Prospero and the burning core of Molech. In each place, the warp seems more turbulent, as if remembering the sins committed there. Sorcerers of the Thousand Suns have studied the phenomenon, calling it a psychic feedback loop, a resonance from the moment Horus died that continues to vibrate through the skein of the warp. Some among them believe this echo is the reason why certain aspects of chaos seem diminished in those regions, as if the gods themselves avoid the wound they once helped create. Others are not so restrained. There are cults who actively seek out the echo, believing that through communion with it, they can unlock the secrets Horus took with him to the grave. They perform rituals on daemon worlds soaked in blood and time, hoping to draw forth even a whisper of his voice, a prophecy, a command, a spark. They build psychic monoliths etched with Luna Wolf symbology, chant verses from corrupted remembrancer texts, and offer up Astartes' gene seed as tribute. Most die horribly. A few succeed, or think they do, and return changed. Not empowered, but hollow, as if something of Horus, some echo of his last pain, now lives inside them. Imperial records quietly acknowledge the phenomenon, though they name it differently. In inquisitorial archives, it is classified as Anomaly Pattern 13 Black, described as a non-sentient psychic disruption field centered around sites of historical warp trauma. The official stance is that it poses no existential threat, but those who spend time near it are to be quarantined or euthanized, depending on the severity of their symptoms. And those symptoms are always the same: insomnia, visions of burning thrones, an irrational hatred of the Emperor, and the compulsive whispering of Horus' name. The echo is not a ghost. It is not a warning. It is a reverberation, the spiritual recoil of the galaxy trying to forget something it cannot. And in a universe built on memory and myth, that makes it dangerous. Because if enough psychers hear that scream, if enough minds begin to tune into that dying thought, who's to say it won't grow louder? There are whispers, always whispers, that the echo is not merely passive, that it feeds on belief. That every time someone invokes Horus' name in fear or reverence, the echo grows a little clearer, a little stronger. That someday far in the future the right voice in the right place might say the wrong words. And the scream will answer back. There is a strange gravity that surrounds the memory of Horus. It pulls at the hearts and minds of those who dare speak his name, reshaping how entire cultures perceive loyalty, rebellion, and the meaning of strength. In the millennia since his death, Horus has transcended biography. He is no longer just a figure from history. He has become a lens, a filter through which both the Imperium and the traitor legions view themselves, their past and their purpose. Among the traitor legions, especially those descended from the original sons of Horus, the memory of their fallen father is a source of bitter division. There are warbands who still refer to themselves by the old name, Luna Wolves. They wear the Eye of Horus not as a mark of allegiance to Chaos Undivided, but as a badge of mourning, of remembrance. These warbands reject Addon's rebranding of the Legion. To them, the Black Legion represents betrayal of a different kind. Not of the Imperium, but of legacy. They believe that by refusing to venerate Horus, the Black Legion has severed its roots. These warbands roam the Eye of Terror like ghosts, obsessively collecting relics from the Great Crusade and the Heresy. They maintain oral histories passed down from the Mournival's last survivors. Some even attempt to recreate the rituals of the Luna Wolves, purged of chaos influence, believing that in doing so, they might return to a purer vision, the one Horus had before the warp twisted it all. But their faith is fractured, delusional. Without their Primarch, their identity decays. Some fall into madness, others into silence. Their ships drift like tombs, echoing with the hymns of a past that will never return. In contrast, the core of the Black Legion treats the name of Horus with complex reverence. Publicly, they obey Abaddon's mandate. Horus is not to be worshipped. His failure is final. But in private, among the oldest of the veteran captains, those who fought at Terra, his name is still spoken with quiet intensity. They do not pray to him. They remember him. Not the demon-possessed warmaster of the End, but the golden general who led them into the stars during the Crusade. The memory stings like a wound that refuses to close. To some, that pain is holy. These quiet remembrances take many forms. Some warriors carve the Eye of Horus into their weapons before battle, then ritually scratch it out afterward, a symbol of both pride and rejection. Others whisper Horus' name before killing loyalists, as if invoking his fury. A few keep fragments of his armor, or claim to, stored in reliquaries aboard their warships. There are even those who recite passages from forbidden remembrancer texts, long banned, that describe Horus in the fullness of his charisma and idealism, a reminder of what was lost. Yet this cultural memory is not confined to the traitors. Within the Imperium, Horus is a name wrapped in fire. Every shrine world, every chapel ship of the ecclesiarchy includes somewhere deep in its vaults an image of the arch-traitor. His face twisted in wrath, his body fallen beneath the Emperor's holy blade. These are not devotional images, but warnings, lessons, reinforcements of imperial truth. Children are raised on cautionary tales of Horus. Scala Progenium indoctrination modules refer to him simply as the first betrayer, stripping him of his name, as if that might lessen his impact. But it never does. In fact, the more the Imperium demonizes him, the more his myth mutates. Among the Adeptus Mechanicus, there are whispers that Horus was a flawed iteration in the Emperor's Great Project, an alpha version of the perfect commander. Among the navigators and rogue traders who traverse the stars far from the light of the Astronomicon, his name is spoken like a spell, both feared and respected. And in the dark corners of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, where psychers struggle under the weight of dreams and warp pressure, some claim to see him in their visions. Not alive, not whole, but present. Even the Adeptus Astartes, the loyalist chapters that descend from the other Primarchs, carry Horus in their memories like a scar. The Imperial Fists remember him as the betrayer of their most sacred battle, the Blood Angels as the doom that robbed them of Sanguinius. The Ultramarines speak his name with clinical disdain, yet every one of their codices is haunted by the question, what if it had been Robut instead? What if any of them had fallen? Horus stands as the measuring stick of failure, the limit of loyalty. This is the paradox of the Warmaster's memory. It binds enemies together even in hatred. It gives meaning to failure. It gives structure to devotion. Horus is not just a symbol of betrayal. He is the shape of betrayal, a template, a gravitational well around which entire cultures orbit. And that orbit is not stable, because the longer Horus's memory endures, the more it invites reinterpretation. To some, he is the first martyr. To others, the final warning. But no matter how he is remembered, he is never allowed to be forgotten. And that, more than any prophecy, any relic, any corpse, is the true horror of his legacy. The dead Warmaster has outlived his death. To destroy a soul is to do violence not only to the being, but to the very fabric of the warp. It is an act so rare, so extreme, that even the daemons whisper of it in tones of fear. When the Emperor erased Horus from existence, the warp did not simply absorb the echo, it recoiled. Something vital was subtracted from the spiritual calculus of the galaxy, and that absence still howls across the tides of the immaterium. The warp is not a place of laws. It is a sea of emotions, dreams, nightmares, and belief. Souls, especially those of powerful psychers and transhuman beings like the Primarchs, rarely vanish. They leave scars, after-images, echoes. The Emperor's sons, even in death, linger. Ferrus Manus, slain by Fulgrim, is said to appear in fragmented visions to certain Iron Hands tech priests. Sanguinius haunts the dreams of the Blood Angels. Even Kurz, whose end was absolute, left a residue of madness that the Night Lords still feel in their gene seed. But Horus left nothing, and it is that absence that terrifies even the most jaded psychers. There are astropaths who describe a dead zone in the warp, a region of anti-memory where thought and signal decay into screaming static. A psychic null that has no explanation except that it coincides with the moment and location of Horus's death. Black ships have altered their routes to avoid this void. Navigators have been driven mad by brief crossings. Even the Ordo Hereticus treats the area as cursed, referring to it as the Hollow Light. Their records speak of petitioners emerging from warp jumps near the anomaly with blank eyes and cracked minds, whispering only one word: gone. Not dead, not lost. Gone. The daemons of the warp do not speak of Horus as they do the other Primarchs. Mortarion is feared. Fulgrim is admired, Magnus is envied. Horus, however, is something else, something off. They call him the Silence, the Forsaken Howl, or the Unnamed. Some say he cannot be perceived within the warp at all, and others claim that his destruction created a psychic sinkhole that pulls dreams into it like a spiritual black hole. Cultist scribes tell stories of daemons who ventured too close to this metaphysical absence and returned maimed, not physically, but conceptually. Unable to remember what they were, as if the memory of Horus erodes the memory of self. This psychic extinction has become an object of study for certain radical factions of the Inquisition and even a few rogue elements of the Adeptus Mechanicus. They theorize that the human soul, especially one magnified by the Primarch phenomenon, might act like a stabilizing force within the warp, a node around which psychic energy orbits. To obliterate such a node does not just remove an influence, it destabilizes the system. Horus's death was not just a loss. It was a detonation, and the shrapnel still flies. Some among the Adeptus Astra Telepathica believe that this spiritual trauma might explain the increased volatility of the warp in the centuries following the heresy. That the great storms, the birth of new daemon worlds, even the malfunctions of the Astronomicon, all might be downstream consequences of Horus' annihilation. That the warp, in losing something so vast and violently, has never recovered its equilibrium. It's as if a psychic organ was removed from the galaxy's metaphysical body, and the bleeding has never stopped. Yet there are others who see opportunity in this wound. Certain Xenos scholars, particularly among the Eldar's more heretical seer cults, view the event of Horus' death as a pivot point in the skein of fate. They believe that his destruction severed a strand of destiny so profoundly that the future itself became unwritable. Some suggest this is why the Imperium continues to survive long past its logical end. Because the pattern was broken, the narrative fractured. The death of Horus was not just a tragedy, it was an editing of the galaxy's story. From the perspective of the ecclesiarchy, this is heresy of the highest order. But even they cannot explain why certain prophecies from the time of the Great Crusade have ceased to manifest. Why the Emperor's tarot occasionally shows blank cards where Horus should be. Why some saintly visions report a throne of silence where a god once wept. The official answer is chaos interference. The unofficial truth? They are afraid. Because they cannot feel him. And in this galaxy, to be forgotten by the warp is worse than damnation. The Black Library of the Eldar, hidden in its pocket dimension, reportedly has a single sealed volume bound in stasis, titled Only the Quiet One. It is said that no Harlequin will touch it, no Farseer will open it, and no guardian of the library will answer questions about it. Yet it is always guarded. Because even in silence, Horus is dangerous. Even in death, his absence hums with a kind of wrongness. In the end, it may not be Horus's actions that echo through eternity, but the way he died. Not the wars he started, but the silence he left behind. Not the body, but the hollow. The emptiness, the void. And in a galaxy so saturated with noise, that void is deafening. The War Master is dead. That truth was carved into the soul of the Imperium at the end of the Siege of Terra and echoed across the stars. Horus, first and greatest of the Primarchs, was unmade, not merely killed but annihilated, his body broken and his soul erased. And yet here we are, 10,000 years later, still speaking his name, still tracing the wake of his ruin, still haunted by what he became and what he left behind. Because Horus never truly left. Not in the whispers of chaos, not in the fears of the High Lords, not in the memories of the legion he once led. His corpse may be gone, burned, buried, desecrated, or locked away in the depths of the vengeful spirit. But the shadow of Horus lingers like radiation after a cataclysm. Every black-clad warrior of the Black Legion wears it on their armor. Every imperial sermon that condemns him renews his myth. Every warlord who claims to follow his example feeds the fire. Horus is not a man anymore. He is an idea, a legend, a symbol of everything that can go wrong when loyalty becomes ambition and ambition becomes madness. But the power of that legend is not in what Horus achieved, it's in what he represents. To the traitors, he is the first flame, the spark that proved the Emperor could be challenged, that the Imperium was not eternal, that even the greatest lies can be broken. To the loyalists, he is the eternal traitor, the reminder that even perfection can fall, that trust can be shattered, that love can turn to hate. He is the galaxy's original sin, and the wound has never healed. And for those in between, the lost, the faithless, the questioning, Horus is a question mark. Was he right to rebel? Was the Imperium worth saving? Could things have gone differently? These are heresies, yes, but they are also the questions that keep his memory alive. In the cracks of certainty, Horus thrives. What happened to his body matters not just because of its physical fate, but because of what it means. Whether it was destroyed by Abaddon, or hidden in the Black Reliquary, or bled into Fabius Bile's clone vats, the War Master's corpse is the physical manifestation of the Imperium's greatest nightmare. The moment when everything almost ended. The moment when a son stood before his father and chose to kill. And that moment is not over, it repeats, again and again. In every rebellion, every heresy, every act of defiance that dares to echo his name. Horus may be gone, but his legend fuels the fire. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where war is eternal and hope is rare, legends are more dangerous than armies. They move hearts, they bend knees, they start wars. The dead War Master still walks the galaxy, not in flesh, but in the minds of those who remember. In the fury of the Black Legion, in the haunted sermons of the ecclesiarchy, in the nightmares of the Inquisition, in the stories whispered on daemon worlds where the stars scream his name. So what happened to Horus's body? It decayed, it was violated, it was weaponized and buried and cloned and destroyed again. But what happened to Horus? He became immortal, not in divinity but in infamy. And in this galaxy, that is the closest thing to godhood anyone ever really achieves. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the darkest corners of Warhammer 40k lore, consider subscribing for more explorations of forgotten myths, forbidden truths, and the legends that refuse to die. The long war continues, and there's always another story to tell.